The Hollow Staircase. The moors of northern England sprawled like a desolate sea, their rolling hills shrouded in a mist that clung to the earth like a living veil, swallowing sound and light in its cold, suffocating embrace. At their heart stood Blackthorn Manor, a jagged fortress of stone and spire that stabbed the bruised sky, its windows dark as empty sockets, gazing upon the world with a malevolence that chilled the soul to its marrow. The manor was a myth woven into the fabric of village lore, whispered in hushed tones over tavern hearths and in shadowed churchyards, a place where staircases twisted into nothingness, their steps ending at walls, ceilings, or voids that devoured light, sound, and sanity itself. Its origins were buried in time, tangled in tales of madness and blood, but its architect, Lord Edmund Blackthorn, was said to have descended into insanity, driven by visions of doorways to realms beyond human comprehension. By 1897, when he vanished, the manor was a labyrinth of impossible geometry, a house that pulsed with a will of its own, its corridors shifting, its staircases ravenous, its walls whispering secrets older than the stones, secrets of a hunger that could never be sated, a void that thrived in the spaces between. Eleanor Vance, a journalist famed for dismantling ghost stories with surgical logic, stood before the manor's rusted iron gates, her resolve tested by the weight of the air, thick with the scent of damp earth and a metallic tang like spilled blood. With her were 5 companions, each drawn to Blackthorn for reasons as varied as the shadows that clung to the moors, their motives knotted like the roots of the gnarled oaks encircling the estate. Tom Harrow, her photographer, masked his unease with forced bravado, his camera a frail shield against the unknown, though his hands trembled as he adjusted the lens, his usual quips dying in the manor's shadow, his grin replaced by a tight grimace. Clara Merton, a local historian consumed by the manor's dark past, clutched a leather-bound notebook crammed with cryptic notes, frantic sketches, and fragments of Blackthorn's journals, her eyes glinting with dread and obsession, her fingers stained with ink and something darker. Father Daniel Kerr, a young priest from the nearby village, had joined at Clara's urging, his quiet demeanor and haunted gaze hinting at burdens unspoken, his silver cross glinting faintly, its edges worn from years of nervous touch, a talisman against the darkness he sensed. Lydia Blackthorn, a distant descendant of the manor's architect, was a reclusive scholar who had reluctantly agreed to guide them, her pale face and guarded expression concealing a connection to the manor she refused to voice, her silence a heavy presence among the group. Samuel Reed, a folklorist and amateur occultist from London, was a late addition at Eleanor's editor's insistence, his wiry frame and feverish eyes betraying a reckless hunger for knowledge, his satchel bulging with tomes on ancient rites and a rune-covered stone he claimed was tied to the manor's curse, its surface cold, its weight unnatural, its pulse a whisper in his mind. The 6th was Dr. Margaret Hale, a skeptical scientist specializing in paranormal debunking, her sharp tongue and clinical demeanor a counterpoint to Eleanor's journalism, her presence a challenge to the group's growing unease, her clipboard and instruments a defiant stand against the manor's mysteries. Eleanor's editor had promised a story to define her career, unravel the myths of Blackthorn Manor, expose its secrets, and sate the public's appetite for the macabre. But as the group faced the gates, the mist curling around them like icy fingers, the manor loomed closer, its spires writhing in the haze, its windows shifting, their reflections void, as if denying the world beyond. A whisper of doubt gnawed at Eleanor's resolve, a primal instinct urging her to flee, to abandon the story before it consumed her, before the manor claimed her as its own. "This place looks like it's ready to swallow us whole," Tom said, his voice strained, his attempt at humor faltering as he snapped a test shot of the manor's facade, the flash dimming as if the darkness resisted it, the image blurred, distorted, as if the manor refused to be seen. His hands shook, his bravado crumbling, his eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to pulse at the edges of his vision. "You sure this is worth it, Elle?" "It's just a house," Eleanor replied, her tone sharper than intended, her scarf tightened against the chill that seeped from the manor, a cold that sank into her bones, her blood, her soul, a cold that whispered of things older than death. "Old, creepy, but nothing we can't handle. We go in, get the story, get out." Clara gripped her notebook like a lifeline, her fingers tracing its embossed cover, her eyes catching on the spires that seemed to twist in the mist, their edges fraying like smoke, their presence a wound in the sky. "It's more than a house," she said, her voice low, almost reverent, trembling with a fear she couldn't conceal. "Lord Blackthorn vanished after years of building staircases to nowhere. They say he owed debts to something ancient, something not human." Villagers heard screams, then silence. "No one's lived here since." Father Daniel adjusted his collar, his fingers lingering on his silver cross, its edges worn, its weight a constant reminder of his faith, his burden, his fear. "The church records speak of Blackthorn," he said quietly, his voice steady but heavy with an unspoken weight, his eyes haunted, as if he saw beyond the veil of the world. "He sought absolution before he disappeared. Said he'd opened a door he couldn't close, that he'd built the manor to appease what came through, a thing that demanded offerings, blood, souls." Lydia stood apart, her dark coat blending with the mist, her pale face unreadable, her eyes fixed on the manor as if it were a riddle she'd spent her life unraveling, a wound she couldn't heal. "He didn't build it to appease," she said, her voice soft but razor-sharp, the first word she'd spoken since their arrival, each syllable a blade. "He built it to trap it, to bind the hollow. And he failed. The hollow doesn't bargain, it takes." Samuel's eyes gleamed with a feverish light, his fingers brushing the rune-covered stone in his satchel, its surface cold, its weight unnatural, its pulse a faint rhythm that matched his own, a whisper that called to him. "The hollow," he said, his voice eager, almost reverent, his words spilling out in a rush, his excitement bordering on mania. "I've read of it, folklore, fragments in ancient grimoires. A hunger that lives in the spaces between, older than the gods, older than time itself. Blackthorn didn't just find it. He woke it, fed it. The staircases, they're its veins, its arteries, its ravenous mouth." Dr. Hale scoffed, her clipboard clutched tightly, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the group, her voice clipped, precise, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Superstition and hyperbole," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "This is a house, nothing more. Architectural oddities, psychological manipulation, perhaps structural decay. There's no entity here, no hollow. Let's not lose our grip on reality before we've even begun." Eleanor rolled her eyes, her skepticism a shield against the unease coiling in her gut, though Lydia's and Samuel's words sent a chill down her spine, a cold that lingered, a whisper that echoed in her mind, even as Hale's pragmatism bolstered her resolve. "Ghost stories and guilt trips," she snapped, her voice wavering despite her effort to hold firm. "Sounds like a man with a guilty conscience, not a supernatural conspiracy. Let's get inside and prove it's just wood and stone." She pushed the gate, and it groaned open, the sound echoing like a low moan across the desolate grounds, as if the manor were stirring from a long slumber, its stones waking to their presence, its hunger rousing from centuries of waiting. The path to the entrance was overgrown, cobblestones slick with moss, the air growing heavier with each step, pressing against their skin like an unseen hand, carrying a faint tang of iron and rot that made Eleanor's stomach churn, her throat tighten, her heart race. The manor loomed closer, its windows seeming to shift, their reflections empty, as if they refused to acknowledge the world outside, their darkness a promise of secrets too terrible to reveal, a hunger too vast to comprehend. Flashback, 1894, Blackthorn Manor. Lord Edmund Blackthorn knelt in a candlelit chamber, its walls bare save for a single staircase spiraling upward to a sealed ceiling, its steps carved with runes that glowed faintly, their light pulsing like a heartbeat, their patterns writhing under his gaze, as if alive, as if hungry. Before him stood 3 figures in hooded cloaks, their faces obscured, their voices a low chant in a tongue older than the moors, older than the stones beneath them. They called themselves the Order of the Veiled Path, keepers of secrets Blackthorn had sought for years, their knowledge a lure he couldn't resist, their promises a poison he drank willingly. "You've seen it," the tallest figure said, her voice a rasp, her hands clutching a locket engraved with runes, its surface cold, its weight unnatural, its pulse a whisper that matched the manor's growing heartbeat. The hollow, the hunger in the spaces between. It speaks to you, as it spoke to those before you. Will you build for it, as they did? Edmund's hands trembled as he clutched his journal, its pages filled with frantic scrawls, sketches of staircases spiraling into voids, runes that burned his eyes, words that clawed at his mind. Hunger. Void. Eternal. "I will build," he said, his voice hoarse, his eyes feverish, his face gaunt, his hair streaked with gray though he was barely 30. "I will bind it, control it. Show me how." The woman opened the locket, revealing a shard of black stone, its surface rippling like liquid, its edges fraying into nothingness, its presence a weight that crushed his thoughts, his soul. "The hollow's heart," she said, her voice a blade. "Place it in the manor's core, build the staircases to feed it, the doorways to hold it. But beware, it demands more than stone, more than blood. It demands you." Edmund laughed, a sound half mad, half choked, his hands shaking as he wrote, "I am its keeper, its offering. The hollow will be mine." The chant grew louder, the runes brighter, the manor groaning as if waking, its stones trembling, its hunger stirring, a hunger that would never sleep, never die. The foyer of Blackthorn Manor was a cathedral of decay, its polished mahogany floor reflecting slivers of light from cracked stained glass windows depicting twisted, unnatural forms, figures that writhed in the dim light, their edges blurring into the glass, their faces void-like, eyeless, their mouths open in silent screams that echoed in Eleanor's mind, a wound that wouldn't heal. A grand staircase dominated the space, spiraling upward under a chandelier that flickered without bulbs, casting jagged shadows that danced like specters across the walls, their movements sinuous, alive, their forms twisting, merging, dissolving into one another, as if the manor itself were watching, waiting, hungry. The air was thick, oppressive, choking with a stench of decay that clung to their throats, their lungs, their souls, and dust motes hung suspended, as if time had stalled within these walls, frozen in a moment of eternal dread. The silence was absolute, no birds, no wind, only their breathing and the manor's faint groans, like wood bending under strain, or something vast and alive stirring beneath the earth, its presence a weight on their minds, a whisper at the edge of their thoughts, a hunger that clawed at their sanity. "Smells like a charnel house," Tom muttered, snapping a photo, his hands shaking as the flash illuminated a tapestry on the wall, depicting a hunt with hounds chasing a shadowy figure whose form dissolved into the weave, its face a void that pulsed with malice, its edges fraying like smoke, its presence a wound in the fabric. His voice trembled, his bravado shattered, his eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to pulse at the edges of his vision. "This place is giving me the creeps, L. Old pipes, damp rot," Eleanor said, though her pulse quickened, her hand trembling as she scribbled in her notebook, "Atmosphere oppressive, sensory overload. Architectural intent. Psychological manipulation." Her skepticism was her armor, but the manor's presence gnawed at it, a subtle erosion she couldn't ignore, a whisper that urged her to listen, to see, to surrender. Clara's voice was a whisper, almost reverent, her eyes fixed on the staircase, her fingers trembling as they traced the runes carved into the banister, their spiraling patterns pulsing under scrutiny, making her eyes ache, as if they were unraveling her thoughts, her soul. Blackthorn designed this place to confuse, to trap, she said, her voice trembling with a fear she couldn't conceal, her words heavy with obsession. Staircases that lead nowhere, doors sealed shut like tombs. He believed it kept the spirits at bay, or fed them, fed the hollow. The runes, they're older than the manor, older than England. Pagan, perhaps, or something older, something that knows no name. Father Daniel knelt by the staircase, his fingers tracing a rune, his silver cross glinting faintly in the dim light, its edges cutting into his palm, drawing a faint bead of blood that mingled with the dark liquid seeping from the wood. "These aren't pagan," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine, his eyes haunted, as if he saw beyond the world. "They're older, from a time before names, before God's light. The church warned against them, wards against things that walk between worlds, things that hunger for more than flesh, more than souls." Lydia stepped forward, her movements slow, deliberate, her eyes scanning the gloom as if reading a story written in the shadows, her expression unreadable, her silence a weight that pressed against the group, a suffocating darkness. "They're not wards," she said, her voice cold, precise, cutting through the silence like a blade, each word a wound. "They're invitations." Blackthorn didn't want to keep the hollow out. He wanted to bring it in, to understand it, to wield its power. He thought he could become eternal, become part of it. He was wrong. Samuel's fingers tightened around the rune-covered stone, its pulse faint but real, a rhythm that matched the manor's heartbeat, a whisper that grew louder in his mind, a call he couldn't ignore. "The hollow is real," he said, his voice a fevered whisper, his eyes gleaming with manic excitement, almost feral. "I found references in a 12th century grimoire, fragments of a hunger that lives in the spaces between, a void that feeds on life, on thought, on being itself. Blackthorn's journals confirm it. The staircases, they're its veins, its arteries, its ravenous mouth. We're standing in its heart, its pulse." Dr. Hale's scoff was sharp, her clipboard a shield, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the group, her voice a whip-crack of reason in the oppressive gloom. "This is absurd," she said, her tone laced with contempt. "Runes, spirits, a hollow. It's architectural eccentricity, nothing more. Structural flaws, optical illusions, perhaps mold affecting cognition. Let's collect data, not fairy tales." Eleanor's pen paused, her hand shaking slightly, her skepticism fraying under the manor's oppressive weight, Lydia's and Samuel's words sinking into her like a blade, a cold that lingered, a whisper that echoed in her mind, even as Hale's logic bolstered her resolve. "Enough with the ghost stories," she snapped, though her voice wavered, her heart pounding, her hands trembling as she gripped her notebook. "Let's start upstairs. Tom, get shots of the architecture. Clara, any specific spots we should check? Lydia, if you know something useful, spit it out. Samuel, keep your occult nonsense to a minimum. Dr. Hale, take your readings, but don't dismiss what we're seeing. Father, keep your superstitions practical." Clara hesitated, her fingers tracing the runes, their patterns writhing like living things, their light pulsing in time with the manor's groans, their edges fraying like smoke, their presence a weight on her mind. "The upper floors," she said, her voice barely audible, her eyes wide with a fear she couldn't conceal, her hands trembling. That's where the strangest staircases are, where Blackthorn's journals might be hidden. But be careful. They say the manner shifts when you're not looking, changes to keep you inside, to feed the hollow's hunger. Father Daniel stood, his cross clutched tightly, his eyes dark with a knowledge he didn't share, his lips moving in a silent prayer, his face pale, his hands trembling with the weight of his faith, his fear. "It's not the manner you should fear," he said, his voice steady but strained, his words heavy with an unspoken truth. "It's what it holds, what it's been holding for centuries, a hunger that never sleeps, never dies, never relents." Lydia's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile that sent a chill down Eleanor's spine, her eyes fixed on the staircase as if it were a path she'd walked before, a fate she'd always known, a destiny she couldn't escape. "You'll see soon enough," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her words chilling, precise, a promise of horrors to come, a warning of truths too terrible to face. Samuel's fingers tightened around the rune-covered stone, its pulse stronger now, a rhythm that matched his own, a whisper that urged him closer, a call he couldn't resist. "We're not just here to see," he said, his voice eager, almost manic, his eyes burning with a hunger of his own. "We're here to know. The hollow is waiting, and we're the ones it's called, the ones it's chosen." Dr. Hale's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You're all letting this place get to you," she said, her tone clipped, her clipboard a shield against the growing dread. "It's a house, not a sentient entity. We'll measure, document, and leave. No need for melodrama." They ascended the grand staircase, each step creaking like a warning, the wood groaning as if alive, protesting their intrusion with a sound that echoed through their bones, their blood, their souls. The walls seemed to lean inward, their panels etched with runes that twisted into shapes that defied logic, loops folding back on themselves, lines vanishing into nowhere, patterns that hurt the eyes to follow, their edges fraying like smoke, their presence a weight that crushed their thoughts, their sanity. At the first landing, a narrow staircase branched off, climbing steeply to a blank wall, its plaster unmarred by door or seam, its surface smooth as if it had never known a door, its presence a mockery of reason, a challenge to their reality. Tom laughed, but the sound was hollow, swallowed by the manor's silence, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the darkness, his hands trembling as he clutched his camera, its lens fogging as if the manor refused to be seen, refused to be known. "Who builds stairs into a wall?" he asked, his voice strained, his eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to pulse at the edges of his vision. "Someone who saw things we don't," Clara said, her voice barely audible, her eyes fixed on the runes, which glowed faintly, their light pulsing in time with the manor's size, their patterns forming fleeting faces, hands, eyes that watched, waited, hungered, their weight a pressure against her chest, her soul. "These are meant to invite, to draw it closer, to feed the hollow's hunger." Lydia nodded, her expression unreadable, her voice cold, precise, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Blackthorn didn't build them to hide," she said, her words sharp, chilling, a truth that sank into their bones. "He built them to open the way, to feed the hollow, to give it form. His journals, they're here, somewhere in the manor. They tell the truth, the cost of his ambition." Samuel's eyes gleamed, his fingers brushing the rune-covered stone, its pulse a rhythm that matched his own, a whisper that grew louder, a call that pulled at his soul. "The journals," he said, his voice reverent, almost manic, his excitement a fever that burned through his fear. "They speak of a relic, a stone like this one, a piece of the hollow's heart. If we find it, we can understand it, maybe even bind it, control it, finish what Blackthorn started." Dr. Hale's voice was a whip crack, her clipboard trembling slightly despite her resolve, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the staircase, her instruments beeping faintly, their readings erratic, unstable. "This is nonsense," she said, her tone sharp, but a tremor betrayed her, a crack in her armor. "The relic is likely a geological anomaly, the journal's a madman's ravings. Let's focus on measurable phenomena: air quality, structural integrity, electromagnetic fields." Eleanor's notes grew frantic, her hand trembling as she wrote, "Architectural anomalies intentional. Psychological warfare. Structural failure unlikely. Journals. Relic. Sensory manipulation." Her skepticism was a thread, fraying under the manor's pressure, the weight of their words, the whispers at the edge of her mind, the groans that seemed to come from the walls themselves, a low, mournful wail that spoke of hunger, of need, of a void that would never be filled. They explored rooms frozen in time, dust-covered furniture draped in cobwebs, their forms twisted, unnatural, as if shaped by something other than human hands, their edges blurring into the shadows, mirrors reflecting nothing but darkness, their surfaces rippling like liquid, alive, distorting their faces into grotesque masks, their eyes burning, their mouths open in silent screams that echoed in their minds. Portraits with eyes that followed their every step, their gazes fixed, accusing, their lips curling into faint smiles that vanished when looked at directly, their presence a weight on their minds, a whisper in their thoughts, a hunger that clawed at their sanity. In one room, a door opened to a brick wall, sealed as if hiding a secret too terrible to reveal, its surface scratched with desperate claw marks, some fresh, some ancient, etched with a frenzy that spoke of terror, of despair, of a hunger that never relented, never rested. Clara's breath hitched, her fingers trembling as she traced the marks, her voice barely audible, her eyes wide with a fear that threatened to consume her. "They tried to escape," she whispered, her face pale, her hands shaking as she clutched her notebook, its pages stained with dark liquid that seemed to pulse, to breathe. "They all tried, and they failed." Father Daniel's cross trembled in his hand, his voice a murmur of prayer, his eyes dark with a fear he couldn't hide, his face pale, his hands shaking with the weight of his faith, his fear, his duty. "Their souls are trapped," he said, his words heavy, strained, a truth that sank into their bones. "Trapped in the manor, in the hollow. We can't let it take us, too." Lydia's voice was cold, precise, cutting through the silence like a blade, each word a wound, a warning. "It's not about escape," she said, her eyes fixed on the wall, her expression unreadable, her silence a weight that pressed against them, a darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. "It's about offering." Blackthorn knew. He wrote about it, sacrifices to keep the hollow sated, to keep it bound. But it was never enough, never will be. Samuel's fingers tightened around the rune-covered stone, its pull stronger now, a rhythm that matched his own, a whisper that grew louder, a call that pulled at his soul, his sanity, his being. "The relic is here," he said, his voice eager, almost manic, his eyes burning with a hunger that mirrored the manor's own. "If we find it, we can use it, control it. We can finish what Blackthorn started, become part of something eternal." Dr. Hale's instruments beeped erratically, her clipboard trembling, her voice sharp but strained, her skepticism cracking under the manor's weight, the claw marks a wound in her logic. "This is psychological," she said, her words faltering, her eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to pulse, to watch, to hunger. "The environment is affecting us, low oxygen, mold, infrasound. We need to stay rational, stay grounded." Eleanor's heart pounded, her hands shaking as she gripped her notebook, her skepticism a fragile shield against the growing dread, the whispers at the edge of her mind, the weight of their words, their fear, their obsession, their hunger. "We're here for a story," she said, her voice raw, her words a desperate attempt to hold on to reason, to hold on to herself. Not to chase fairy tales or fight demons. Let's keep moving, find something concrete. Tom pointed to a staircase hidden behind a tattered curtain, its steps narrow and worn, stained with something dark that glistened in the faint light, like blood that refused to dry, its surface rippling as if alive, its presence a wound in the fabric of reality, a call to the void. "This one looks normal," he said, his voice strained, his bravado gone, his hands trembling as he clutched his camera, its lens fogging, its weight a burden he couldn't shake, a reminder of his fear. "Worth a shot?" Eleanor nodded, though her instincts screamed to turn back, a primal fear clawing at her chest, her heart pounding so hard it hurt, her mind teetering on the edge of collapse, the manor's presence a weight that threatened to crush her, to consume her. "Lead the way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her hands trembling, her resolve fraying like the shadows that danced around them. Flashback, 1896, Blackthorn Manor. Edmund stood in a chamber deep within the manor, its walls lined with staircases spiraling into nothingness, their steps gleaming like polished bone, their surfaces slick with a dark liquid that pulsed, alive, aware, hungry. A stone altar stood at the center, its surface carved with runes, its edges stained with blood, its presence a weight that crushed his thoughts, his soul, his being. The rune-covered stone rested on the altar, its surface cold, its weight unnatural, its pulse a rhythm that matched the manor's heartbeat, a whisper that called to him, a hunger that he couldn't resist, couldn't escape. Beside it lay the locket, its runes glowing faintly, its shard of black stone rippling like liquid, its edges fraying into nothingness, its presence a wound in the world, a call to the void. He clutched his journal, its pages filled with frantic scrawls, his hands shaking, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow, his voice a shadow of what it had been, a ghost of the man he once was. "I found it," he wrote, his words trembling, his ink bleeding into the page, like the liquid on the stairs, like the blood in his veins. "The hollow's heart, the relic that binds it to this world. But it demands more blood, more souls, more staircases to feed its hunger. I've built them, I've offered them, but it's not enough, never enough." The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices, human and inhuman, screaming, pleading, mocking, a cacophony that clawed at his mind, his soul, his sanity. "Climb." The staircases pulsed, their steps shifting, leading to voids that pulsed with hunger, their darkness a maw that called to him, that demanded him. He laughed, a sound that was madness, half-choked, his hands shaking as he carved another rune into the altar, the blood dripping from his fingers, mingling with the liquid on the stone, the manor's heartbeat growing louder, faster, a hunger that consumed him, that became him. "I will bind you," he whispered, his voice a vow, a plea, a surrender, a sacrifice. "I will be your keeper, your offering, your eternal servant." The void answered, its laughter a sound that shattered his mind, his soul, his being, a sound that echoed through the manor, through the moors, through time itself, a hunger that would never sleep, never die, never relent. The staircase was a trap, its walls claustrophobic, closing in like the jaws of a predator, pulsing with a subtle rhythm, a heartbeat that echoed in their bones, their blood, their souls, a heartbeat that was the manor's own, the hollow's own. The air grew colder, heavier, the metallic tang sharpening until it coated their tongues, bitter and biting, a taste that spoke of decay, of death, of something older than both, something that had always been, would always be. The steps creaked ominously, each one a warning, each one a threat, and Eleanor's flashlight flickered, its beam struggling against the darkness, flickering like a dying star, casting shadows that danced like specters, their forms twisting, merging, dissolving into one another, their edges fraying like smoke, their presence a hunger that clawed at their minds, their sanity, their souls. Father Daniel's prayers were a steady murmur, his voice strained but resolute, a lifeline in the oppressive silence, but his cross trembled in his hand, its edges cutting into his palm, drawing blood that dripped onto the steps, mingling with the dark liquid that coated them, that pulsed with a life of its own. Clara clutched her notebook, her knuckles white, her eyes darting to the walls, where the runes glowed brighter, their patterns writhing like living things, their light pulsing in time with the manor's heartbeat, their presence a weight that crushed her thoughts, her soul. Lydia walked behind, her steps measured, her silence unnerving, her eyes scanning the walls as if reading a story only she could see, a story written in blood, in shadow, in hunger. Samuel's rune-covered stone pulsed in his satchel, its rhythm matching his own, a whisper that grew louder, a call that pulled at his soul, his sanity, his being. Dr. Hale's instruments beeped erratically, her clipboard trembling, her voice sharp but strained, her skepticism cracking under the manor's weight, the runes awound in her logic, a challenge to her reality. At the top, the staircase ended at a wooden ceiling, no door or hatch in sight, its surface smooth, unmarred, hollow when Tom tapped it, his breath fogging in the frigid air, his hands shaking, his eyes wide with a fear that threatened to consume him. "Nothing up there," he whispered, his voice barely audible, his bravado gone, his camera slipping from his hands, its lens fogging, its weight a burden he couldn't shake. Then they heard it, a whisper, soft and guttural, rising from the shadows below, weaving through the silence like a blade, its tone cold, commanding, inhuman, a sound that wasn't sound but something deeper, something that clawed at their minds, their souls, their sanity. "Keep climbing," it hissed, its voice scraping like nails on bone, cutting through their thoughts, unraveling their sense of self, their reality. Eleanor froze, her flashlight sweeping the stairs, its beam faltering, flickering like a dying star, the darkness swallowing it, a void pulsing with intent, its edges fraying like smoke, its presence a weight that crushed her thoughts, her soul. "Who said that?" she demanded, her voice shaking, her skepticism cracking, her heart pounding so hard it hurt, her hands trembling as she gripped her notebook, its pages trembling, its words blurring, as if the manor were erasing her reality, her existence. Clara's notebook slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor, its pages fluttering open to reveal frantic sketches, staircases spiraling into voids, their lines chaotic, obsessive, surrounded by runes and scrawled words, hunger, void, eternal, sacrifice. Her face drained of color, her eyes wide with terror, her breath shallow, her hands trembling as she backed against the wall, her nails clawing at the wood, as if it could save her, as if it could stop the hunger. "It's the house," she whispered, her voice breaking, her eyes reflecting the void's darkness, her soul teetering on the edge of collapse. "It speaks. The hollow speaks." Father Daniel's prayer faltered, his cross clutched tightly, his eyes wide with a fear he couldn't hide, his face pale, his hands trembling, blood trickling from his palm where the cross's edges had cut him, mingling with the liquid on the steps. "Not the house," he said, his voice low, urgent, a warning that sank into their bones. "Something inside it, something old, something that's been waiting, hungering, for centuries." Lydia's lips twitched, that ghost of a smile returning, chilling Eleanor to the bone, her eyes fixed on the void below, as if drawn to it, as if it were calling her home, as if she had always known it. "It's always been here," she said, her voice soft, almost reverent, a truth that cut through the silence like a blade, a wound that wouldn't heal. Blackthorn didn't build the manor. He found it, woke it. The staircases, they're its veins, its arteries, its ravenous mouth. Samuel's rune-covered stone pulsed, its rhythm matching his own, a whisper that grew louder, a call that pulled at his soul, his sanity, his being. "The Hollow," he said, his voice a fevered whisper, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that mirrored the manor's own, a hunger that threatened to consume him. "It's calling us, like it called Blackthorn, like it called the Order. We're part of it now, part of its hunger." Dr. Hale's instruments screamed, their readings erratic, their beeps a cacophony that drowned out her voice, her clipboard trembling, her skepticism cracking under the manor's weight, the whisper a wound in her logic, a challenge to her reality. "This is impossible," she said, her voice strained, her eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to pulse, to watch, to hunger. "Acoustics, infrasound, hallucinations. There's a rational explanation, there has to be." Eleanor's voice shook, her skepticism shattering under the manor's weight, the whisper echoing in her mind like a memory she didn't own, a voice that wasn't hers, a hunger that wasn't hers. "It's a trick," she said, her voice breaking, her flashlight shining down the staircase, but the darkness swallowed it, a void pulsing with intent, its edges fraying like smoke, its presence a weight that crushed her thoughts, her soul, her sanity. "It's an illusion, a trap." The whisper came again, louder, from above this time, its tone insistent, commanding, a chorus of voices weaving together, human and inhuman, a cacophony that clawed at their minds, their souls, their sanity. "Climb higher." Tom's camera slipped from his hands, clattering down the steps and vanishing into the shadow with a final, echoing thud, the sound swallowed by the darkness, a wound that wouldn't heal. "We need to leave," he said, his voice raw, his eyes wide with panic, a panic that wasn't entirely human, as if something else looked out through his eyes, something that knew the void, something that hungered for it. "Now, Elle, we need to go now." But the staircase behind them was gone. Where they'd climbed, a smooth wall stood, its wood unmarked, as if the stairs had never existed, as if the manor had reshaped itself to trap them, its walls closing in like a predator's jaws, its hunger palpable, its presence a weight that crushed their thoughts, their souls, their sanity. Eleanor pounded the wall, her knuckles stinging, her breath coming in sharp gasps, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst, her mind teetering on the edge of collapse. "This isn't possible," she said, her voice breaking, her skepticism shattered, her reality unraveling like the shadows that danced around them. "It's a trick, an illusion, it has to be." Clara's voice was a whisper, her eyes wide with terror, her hands trembling as she retrieved her notebook, its pages now stained with that dark liquid, its sketches bleeding into one another, the word hunger scrawled across them in frantic ink, as if the manor were bleeding through them, as if the hollow were claiming them. "The manor changes," she said, her voice barely audible, her eyes reflecting the void's darkness, her soul teetering on the edge of collapse. "It traps you. Blackthorn built it to feed something, something in the walls, in the voids, in the spaces between." Father Daniel raised his cross, his voice steadying, though his hands shook, blood trickling from his palm, his face pale, his eyes burning with a defiance that threatened to break him. "Whatever it is, it's old," he said, his words strained, a warning that sank into their bones. "Older than sin, older than God's light. We need to stay together, keep moving, find a way out." Lydia's eyes narrowed, her voice cold, precise, cutting through the chaos like a blade, each word a wound, a warning, a truth. "There's no leaving," she said, her eyes fixed on the wall, her expression unreadable, her silence a weight that pressed against them, a darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. "Blackthorn tried. He wrote about it, tried to seal the door, to stop the hunger. But the hollow is part of the manor now, part of the land, part of us. It's always been here, waiting, hungering." Samuel's rune-covered stone pulsed, its rhythm matching his own, a whisper that grew louder, a call that pulled at his soul, his sanity, his being. "The relic," he said, his voice a fevered whisper, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that mirrored the manor's own, a hunger that threatened to consume him, to make him part of it. "It's here, somewhere in the manor. If we find it, we can use it, control it. We can finish what Blackthorn started, become part of something eternal." Dr. Hale's instruments screamed, their readings erratic, their beeps a cacophony that drowned out her voice, her clipboard trembling, her skepticism cracking under the manor's weight, the whisper a wound in her logic, a challenge to her reality. "This is impossible," she said, her voice strained, her eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to pulse, to watch, to hunger. Acoustics, infrasound, hallucinations. "There's a rational explanation, there has to be." A deep groan echoed through the manor, like the house itself was waking, its timbers straining under an unseen weight, the sound reverberating through their bones, shaking the walls, the floor, the very air, a sound that was the manor's own, the hollow's own. The ceiling above cracked, revealing a void, not a room, but an endless black expanse that pulled at the light, at their thoughts, at their very souls, its darkness pulsing with a hunger that was alive, aware, eternal, a hunger that knew their names, their fears, their weaknesses. The air turned frigid, and Eleanor's breath caught as she saw movement, a shape, humanoid but wrong, its limbs too long, its face a featureless blur pulsing with malice, its edges fraying like smoke, its presence a weight that crushed the air from their lungs, a hunger that clawed at their minds, their souls, their sanity. "Climb," it hissed, its voice scraping like nails on bone, cutting through their thoughts, a sound that wasn't sound but something deeper, something that clawed at their sanity, unraveling their sense of self, their reality, their existence. Tom screamed, stumbling back, but the stairs tilted, urging them toward the void, the wood splintering under the strain, the runes glowing brighter, their light searing their eyes, their patterns writhing, forming faces, hands, eyes that watched, waited, hungered. Eleanor grabbed Clara, pulling her away, but the historian's eyes were glassy, her breath shallow, her face pale as death, her hands trembling as she clutched her notebook, its pages now dripping with that dark liquid, as if the manor were bleeding through them, as if the hollow were claiming her. "It wants us," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes reflecting the void's darkness, her soul teetering on the edge of collapse. "It's hungry, always hungry." The shape reached out, its fingers stretching impossibly, brushing Eleanor's cheek, the touch burning like ice, searing her skin, a pain that sank into her bones, her soul, her being, a pain that was the hollow's own, a hunger that knew no end. She screamed, shoving Clara toward the wall, her mind reeling, her heart pounding, her hands trembling as she gripped her notebook, its pages trembling, its words blurring, as if the manor were erasing her reality, her existence, her soul. Father Daniel stepped forward, his cross raised, his voice rising in a prayer that shook with defiance, the words ancient, forceful, a challenge to the darkness, in nomine Patris, e Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. The shape laughed, a sound like shattering glass that reverberated in their skulls, drowning out the prayer, splitting their thoughts like a blade, the sound of physical force that knocked Daniel back, his cross trembling in his hand, blood streaming from his palm, his face pale, his eyes burning with a defiance that threatened to break him. The stairs tilted further, the wood groaning, splintering, as if the manor itself were rejecting them, its hunger palpable, its presence a weight that crushed their resolve, their sanity, their souls. Tom slipped, clawing at the steps, his nails tearing into the wood, leaving bloody streaks that mingled with the dark liquid coating the stairs, the sight sickening, surreal, a wound in the fabric of reality. "Help me," he cried, his voice raw, his eyes wide with a fear that wasn't entirely human, as if something else looked out through his eyes, something that knew the void, something that hungered for it. Eleanor lunged, grabbing his wrist, her muscles straining as she pulled, her boots slipping on the slick steps, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst, her mind teetering on the edge of collapse. But the shape's laughter grew, a cacophony that shook the walls, the ceiling, the very air, and Tom's eyes widened, his pupils dilating until they were black voids, swallowing the whites, his face contorting as if something were moving beneath his skin, reshaping him, claiming him. "It's in my head," he whispered, his voice a hollow echo, not his own, his body trembling, his hands clawing at his face, drawing blood, his soul unraveling like the shadows that danced around them. His body went limp, and he was yanked upward, vanishing into the darkness of the void, his scream cut short as the blackness swallowed him, the sound echoing in Eleanor's mind, a wound that wouldn't heal, a loss that would never fade. The void pulsed, and the whisper became a chorus, a cacophony of voices, pleading, mocking, screaming, in languages both human and inhuman, a symphony of anguish and hunger that clawed at their minds, their souls, their sanity. "Climb. Join us." Clara sobbed, pressing herself against the wall, her hands clawing at the wood, her nails splintering as she tore at the runes, as if they could save her, as if they could stop the hunger, her notebook falling to the floor, its pages now a chaotic mess of sketches and scrawled words. Hunger. Void. Eternal. Sacrifice. "It's Blackthorn," she said, her voice breaking, her eyes wide with terror, her soul teetering on the edge of collapse. "He built this to feed the hollow, to sate its hunger. The staircases bear its mouth, its throat, its ravenous hunger." Father Daniel's face was pale, but he held his ground, his cross trembling in his bloodied hand, his lips moving in silent prayer, his eyes burning with defiance, his face pale, blood trickling from his nose, his hands trembling as he clutched the cross, its edges cutting into his flesh, drawing blood that mingled with the liquid on the stairs. "We can fight it," he said, his voice hoarse, strained, a defiance that threatened to break him. "Faith can hold it back. We need to find the heart of this place, where it's strongest, where it feeds." Lydia's voice was cold, precise, cutting through the chaos like a blade, each word a wound, a warning, a truth. "There is no fighting it," she said, her eyes fixed on the void, her expression unreadable, her silence a weight that pressed against them, a darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. "Blackthorn tried. He wrote about it, tried to seal the door, to stop the hunger. But the hollow is part of the manna, part of the land, part of us. It's always been here, waiting, hungering, eternal." Samuel's rune-covered stone pulsed, its rhythm matching his own, a whisper that grew louder, a call that pulled at his soul, his sanity, his being. "The relic," he said, his voice a fevered whisper, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that mirrored the manor's own, a hunger that threatened to consume him, to make him part of it. "It's here, somewhere in the manor. If we find it, we can use it, control it. We can finish what Blackthorn started, become part of something eternal." Dr. Hale's instruments screamed, their readings erratic, their beeps a cacophony that drowned out her voice, her clipboard trembling, her skepticism cracking under the manor's weight, the whisper a wound in her logic, a challenge to her reality. "This is impossible," she said, her voice strained, her eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to pulse, to watch, to hunger. Acoustics, infrasound, hallucinations. "There's a rational explanation, there has to be." Eleanor's mind raced, clinging to fragments of logic, her journalist's instinct fighting to make sense of the impossible, her hands shaking as she pounded the wall, her fists bruising, her knuckles bleeding, her heart pounding, her mind teetering on the edge of collapse. The wall split with a crack like breaking bone, revealing another staircase descending into shadow, its steps slick with that dark, viscous liquid that smelled of decay, of death, of something older than both, its surface rippling as if alive, as if hungry, as if it knew their names, their fears, their weaknesses. "We can't stay here," she said, dragging Clara toward the new stairs, her voice raw, her heart pounding, her hands trembling, her resolve fraying like the shadows that danced around them. "Move!" Father Daniel followed, his prayers a steady murmur, a beacon in the darkness, though his eyes betrayed a growing fear, his face pale, blood trickling from his nose, his hands trembling as he clutched the cross, its edges cutting into his flesh, drawing blood that mingled with the liquid on the stairs. Lydia hesitated, her eyes fixed on the void, as if drawn to it, as if it were calling her home, her expression unreadable, her silence unnerving, a weight that pressed against them, a darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. "Lydia, come on!" Eleanor shouted, her voice breaking, her heart pounding, her hands trembling, and Lydia moved, her steps slow, deliberate, as if she were walking toward a fate she'd always known, a destiny she couldn't escape. Samuel's rune-covered stone pulsed, its rhythm matching his own, a whisper that grew louder, a call that pulled at his soul, his sanity, his being. "The relic," he said, his voice a fevered whisper, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that mirrored the manor's own, a hunger that threatened to consume him, to make him part of it. "It's here, somewhere in the manor. If we find it, we can use it, control it. We can finish what Blackthorn started, become part of something eternal." Dr. Hale's instruments screamed, their readings erratic, their beeps a cacophony that drowned out her voice, her clipboard trembling, her skepticism cracking under the manor's weight, the whisper a wound in her logic, a challenge to her reality. "This is impossible," she said, her voice strained, her eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to pulse, to watch, to hunger. Acoustics, infrasound, hallucinations. "There's a rational explanation, there has to be." They stumbled down the staircase, the air thickening, the walls closing in like the jaws of a beast, the runes glowing brighter, their light pulsing in time with the manor's heartbeat, their patterns writhing, shifting, forming faces, hands, eyes that watched, waited, hungered, their presence a weight that crushed their thoughts, their souls, their sanity. The steps were treacherous, the liquid coating them making each step a gamble, their boots slipping, their hands grasping at the banister for balance, its wood burning their skin, the runes searing their palms, their pain a reminder of the manor's hunger, the hollow's hunger. Eleanor's flashlight flickered, its beam faltering, casting jagged shadows that seemed to move, forming shapes that weren't human, weren't anything she could name, their edges fraying like smoke, their presence a hunger that clawed at their minds, their souls, their sanity. At the bottom, a door waited, its frame warped, leaking a sickly green light that flickered like a dying star, its glow casting grotesque shadows across the walls, their forms twisting, writhing, as if alive, as if hungry, as if they knew their names, their fears, their weaknesses. Clara clutched Eleanor's arm, her nails drawing blood, her voice a desperate plea, her eyes wide with terror, her soul teetering on the edge of collapse. "Don't open it," she begged, her voice breaking, her hands trembling as she clutched her notebook, its pages now dripping with that dark liquid, as if the manor were bleeding through them, as if the hollow were claiming her. "It's where they go. It's where it lives, where the hollow feeds." Father Daniel's eyes were dark, his cross held high, his voice steady despite the blood streaming from his nose, his face pale as death, his hands trembling as he clutched the cross, its edges cutting into his flesh, drawing blood that mingled with the liquid on the stairs. "If it's a demon, we face it," he said, his words forceful, defiant, a challenge to the darkness. "If it's something else, we face it still. We have no choice, no other path. Lydia's voice was cold, precise, cutting through the chaos like a blade, each word a wound, a warning, a truth. "It's not a demon," she said, her eyes fixed on the door, her expression unreadable, her silence a weight that pressed against them, a darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. "It's the hollow, older than demons, hungrier than hell." Blackthorn called it the eternal hunger, the thing that lives in the spaces between. He thought he could harness it, use it, become eternal. He was wrong. Samuel's hands shook as he clutched the rune-covered stone, its pulse intensifying, a rhythm that matched his own, a whisper that was no longer a whisper but a scream, a call that pulled at his soul, his sanity, his being. "The relic is beyond that door," he said, his voice a fevered whisper, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that mirrored the manor's own, a hunger that threatened to consume him, to make him part of it. "Blackthorn's journals, the altar, the locket, they're there. We can use them, bind the hollow, control it, become part of something eternal." Dr. Hale's voice was sharp, shaking, her skepticism crumbling, her instruments screaming, a cacophony that drowned out her words, her logic, her reality. "This is madness," she said, her voice breaking, her eyes wide with a fear that threatened to overwhelm her, her clipboard slipping from her hands, trembling, as if the manor itself were rejecting it, rejecting her. "We're hallucinating, we're losing our minds. We need to find an exit, now, before we..." Eleanor's hand trembled on the knob, her mind racing, her heart pounding, her instincts screaming that it was a trap, that the manor would never let them go, that the void would claim them as it had claimed Tom, as it hungered to claim them all. The whispers were deafening, a chorus of screams in languages she didn't know, twisting into her thoughts, clawing at her sanity, a hunger that drowned.